For those listening and for myself, what's been your journey? How have you gotten to who you
Good
are now? And
Lord.
a very
How
broad
have I got
question.
to Yeah, I was gonna say, what have I been doing for the last 50 plus some GST years? Goodness, I started my career out as a lawyer
Uh-huh.
in Western Australia, and I seem to do things in blocks of 7. I left there after about 7 years and came over to Sydney, to the big smoke. Was planning
Mhm.
on coming here for 2 years, got a mortgage. When one gets a mortgage in Sydney, one has to stay a little bit more than 2 years.
That's right.
So I I built a career over here in law, working in the big end of town, and just started managing people at a relatively young age, about, again, 7 or 8 years into my career. Started managing people. At one stage, it was just me and one other person. At another stage, it was me and 50 lawyers.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so I really enjoyed the people side of it, and seeing especially younger lawyers develop and grow, both as lawyers and as people. And so,
Mhm.
a fair few years ago, I retrained as a coach to International Coaching Federation standards. So I do that as well. I have a couple of businesses in the coaching space. One is with a couple of my other colleagues who are lawyers turned coaches. And then I have a one-on-one business. And then wrapped around all of that, I still love the law. So I have my own law firm. And I also love
Beautiful.
doing business. I love doing deals. I was a deal junkie when I was a lawyer. So I sit on a bunch of boards as well. So I have a non-executive directorship career as well. I read Richard Branson's book, Losing My Virginity, I think it was, a number of years ago. And he
Yep.
said something along the lines of, you should have 7 sources of income. So you should diversify and have 7 sources of income. I potentially read that the wrong way, because I now have about 7 or 8 jobs. And a colleague of mine, actually, she said that to me. She said, "Claire, I'm sure you read that the wrong way. I'm sure he didn't mean have 7 or 8 jobs. He meant just have 7 sources." So I have about 7 or 8 jobs. That's what I say to people. So
Wow.
I do a little bit of everything.
How do you manage that?
I'm very good at managing my time. I follow the Eisenhower principles, the Eisenhower matrix. So work
Yeah.
out what's urgent, what's not urgent, what's important, and what's not important. Do the stuff that's urgent and important that needs to be done today. Schedule what's urgent but doesn't need to be done today. Don't do the
Mm.
stuff that's neither urgent nor important. And then get other people to help me with the stuff that's not important but still needs to be done. So if you can manage your diary well and have people around you, of course, to support. I don't do this all by myself. I couldn't do
Mm.
it all by myself. I have great colleagues, great business partners, and a great family, and a great partner in my husband.
Wow, that's beautiful. So that's a
Hmm,
4 quadrant thing, isn't it? It's important,
correct.
urgent, not important, not urgent, right?
Yes, yes. It's meant to, I don't know whether the story is true. It's meant to be the way that President Eisenhower operated the White House. So if it was urgent and important, it was said to stay on his desk that day until he finished it. Anything else either was rescheduled, was not done, or was delegated to somebody else to do. And it works for me.
Mm.
And if you look at my diary, Luke, it's everything in my diary is color coded. So
Mm.
different jobs have different colors, and then I have certain periods of time blocked for certain things. And then Fridays are I would call them my thinking days, or they're the days that I don't see clients on Fridays. And that's when I do the things that I need to do either privately, or that's the days when I have the big thinking. That's the strategy days. That's the
Contemplation.
I'm not seeing any clients today. This is Claire's day to do what Claire needs to do. And that works
Mm.
really fantastically. I've been doing that for a number of years now. So anybody ever
Wow.
tries to get in my diary, they can never get in on a Friday.
Wow. You know what I love about business is that like it forces you to like there's no excuse you can make. It's like, well, this is stuffing up. It's like it's your fault, your fault. You can't do that because it all comes back to the business owner to a degree. Right. Well, I mean, entirely, I would say actually. And like from the hiring process, from like how you hiring, like your catch up process. I mean, there's just some things with HR, but you're forced to look at what you're making mistakes in. And if you've got a huge ego and you're like, I didn't do anything wrong, like you won't make progress. I love that about business.
Yeah, and it's interesting the space that I work in with lawyers and
Mm,
non-lawyers, but the egos that I see in the legal industry, and I'm not going to be, I'm not going to say I didn't have one. I mean, everybody does have one to some degree, but in my younger years, I probably thought that I was a lot better than I think I actually probably was. I had inflated impressions of my own. Um, what would be the word? Nothing could stop me. I could do everything. No one could get in my way, and I was perfect. I think with a few grey hairs and a few knockbacks over the years, with age, certainly in my case anyway, did come wisdom, and I've learnt to temper a lot of the to use the word perfectionism again. I've learnt to temper a lot of that in the way that I practice and the way that I do business. And I look back now, I've worked for myself now for 7 or 8 years, I think. And I look back and I think, wow, how on earth did I work for people back then? I must have not only been a nightmare to work with, but I just love doing so many different. I've got a little bit of a restless personality. I just love doing so many different things and working with so many different people. And
mhm,
working for one employer just wouldn't suit me. So a lot of the work I do, particularly from a coaching perspective, and particularly with younger people, is I tell them go out on your own, dip your toe in the water, go and have a shot, go and start a business, go and start your own law firm, go and do whatever the heck it is that you want, because what's the worst thing that could happen? And that's probably not going to happen. But
mhm.
one of the worst things that can happen in life is having regret. And I certainly don't want to have regret. So I like to have a good bash at everything that I try. Not everything works, but a lot of it does. And that's the good stuff.
Mm. I love that, and I heard I'm not sure where it was. Actually, it was a guy called Chang Meng Tan. He was a Google employee who taught mindfulness there, and he
Oh,
said
yeah.
that the goal with the ego is that you want to expand it when you need to, and then shrink it when you need to.
I like that.
You
It's
know,
cool.
so if you
Yeah,
need
quite
confidence,
clever.
you speak on a stage, you expand it. If you need to speak to an employee and have compassion, empathy, you shrink it. Right? Just two examples, right? Um,
That's
so
actually
with the,
awesome. I like that.
Yeah, so every time I hear the ego thing, people are like, "You need to have no ego," or "You need to have ego." I was speaking to someone this morning who was on the more, you could say, spiritual side of things, and she was also actually a lawyer, and she was in corporate law. And she was saying that in corporate law, it was just so cutthroat, 16 years ago for
Hmm.
her that she just kind of like, "This is enough. I'm gonna go on this
Yep.
spiritual journey," and she just had that experience, and she's talking about the ego and how we all got an ego. We need to learn how to, what's the word, view it as something separate to us, like kind of like leaves rolling on a
Hmm.
river kind of thing. And my objection to that was like, I think that the ego is a tool, like any emotion, like anger, like resentment. It's all a tool to be able to push you in a certain direction if you let it. It's fuel. It's rocket fuel.
That's cool. I'm actually reading a book at the moment. I don't know if you've heard of this one, The Pursuit of Perfect.
No, I haven't.
Actually, it's a bit fuzzy because of the screen. By Tal Ben Shahar, New York best-selling author of Happier, and he's talking about how to stop chasing perfection and start living a richer, happier life. And I'm just up to chapter 2, and chapter 2, because you were talking about emotions, then is all about accepting failure and accepting your emotions and living through your emotions, and how, as perfectionists, because often lawyers are perfectionists, we learn to either ignore pain, but just as equally can often ignore success. And it's never good enough. And we always want something
Mm,
bigger and better. And that just builds to more disappointment. So that's a really
mm,
interesting take that the lady was, that you spoke to, as well as your interpretation. Great book, by the way.
yeah. Yeah, awesome. And there's also something called characterology as well. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. I don't know if it's found in science or not, but it goes through this guy called Wilhelm Reich. About 150 years ago, I think he wrote this book around characterology, and it talks about how there's certain people who have certain physical attributes in the way they sit, how they stand, how they present themselves that speak to their personality type. So, for example, there's like rigid. Someone who's a rigid. They tend to be perfectionistic, and they also tend to not celebrate success because it's never good enough,
Mm-hmm.
like you said there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started working with this fellow called John Herbert, and he does a lot of characterology and body psychotherapy stuff. And because for me, when I used to see a psychologist in the past, I always felt like it was like sitting in a chair and like I feel this way, or like just with your words. But I felt like there was so much in the body that needs to be moved. So I started seeing this guy John Herbert, who's a close friend now. He started talking about characterology and how there's like rigid, there's psychopaths, not the traditional clinical diagnosis DSM-5 thing, but rigid psychopath. There's oral people who are like Russell Brands of the world, like very talky and all those kind of things. And each of them has their strengths and their weaknesses, right? It's like the big five personality types.
Wow. As you were saying that, I was thinking of the Moravian rule of communication. Have you heard of that? The
No, do
Moravian rule
tell.
of communication. It's basically, I'm going to have to look at my picture because I've got to remember what it is. It's basically that because you were talking about bodies, then it's when we're communicating with other people and being understood. It's also called the 738-55 rule, and the 7% refers to the actual words that you say. So when you're speaking to somebody, what they're
Oh yeah,
taking
yep.
in, only 7% of it is the words, 38% is the tone and the pitch of your voice, but 55% of it is your body language and your facial expressions, and how much that has changed is what I'm asking. I wonder how much of that has changed with COVID and just like we are doing now, speaking online. And there's another really good book that I've read recently, Digital Body Language by Erica Dwan. I think her name is
Oh wow.
Dwan. And that's a
Mm.
fantastic book. I really enjoyed reading that and the different ways of communicating. And how, simple things like if you send somebody a text and you just say no, lowercase no, or if you say no, ... all of a sudden that becomes very suggestive. Or if it's capital N, capital O with an exclamation mark, it sounds like you're shouting at them and you're really angry.
Hmm.
Um, and just how that is overlaying the Moravian rule of communication, and that there is just so much more to communication than going back to the 7% words. There's so much more in what we do that takes over what we say to a certain degree. I think I expressed that correctly, but
Yeah.
really interesting. I think it kind of segues what you were talking about just then.
Well, it's huge as well, right? So I'm 28 years old, and my generation is a millennial generation. And when I'm texting my mom or my dad or someone who is, say, in their 40s or above, their texting can be very cutthroat, right? Very like yes, no, or like yes, comma, okay, okay, comma, Luke, like very punctual, like they're
Yeah,
trying to do like an English exam or something.
yeah.
And from my generation, like it's very obviously there's exceptions to the rule. People are all different, but in my generation, generally speaking, like you're almost like it's almost like a second language, meaning that
Mm.
we interpret things very differently, like smiley faces, all these emojis, and all these kind of things. And I think it's quite interesting because in my work, working with people who are in that 40 and above, there's certain things that are like little tweaks here and there for speaking to a millennial audience. Like even on Instagram, for example, like using images versus using videos and the camera angle and things like that. These all make a difference to connecting with your audience. And there's a wrong way and a right way to do it. So there's a lot to it.
And it's so complicated when you do public speaking as well. I used to do a fair bit of public speaking. I've sort of toned it down over the years, or turned it down over the years. But when you go out to an audience of 100, 1,000, 10,000, whatever it is, you've got all the different generations in the room, and then you've got people that have got certain preferred ways of communicating, whether they're visual, whether they're oral, whether they're kinesthetic. What are they going to respond to? And if you're going to be an effective public speaker, you have to hit on all of those points if you want to engage the entire room. But you never can engage the entire room. There's always going to be somebody
Mm.
who's yawning or walking out, and you imagine, oh gosh, they're walking out because I must be rubbish, I must be such a bad speaker, when in fact they could just be walking out to go to the bathroom. One never knows.
Yeah.
But there's so much into communication, and it flows into everything that we do. It doesn't really matter what job we have, how you can be misunderstood so easily. And I know with my sons, they're 21 and 23,
Mhm.
and if I ring them, they're not going to answer the phone. They're like, "Why are you ringing me? Why don't you just text me?" I feel like I've invaded their world if I ring them.
Mm.
And then when they do reply to a text, it's about 3 or 4 days later, and my husband will just get so furious, and he'll go, "Why did you not reply?" Well, I didn't need to reply straight away. So there's certainly, and I think COVID again, to go back to COVID, COVID is, I think, to a certain degree, not brought us together. It might have actually pushed us apart in our differences in communication, which is why that book, Digital Body Language, was really such an interesting read. And the lady,
Mm,
when she wrote it, I think she published it just at the beginning of COVID and the lockdown. So I think she had a bestseller on her hands, right time, right place, right book.
smart.
Yeah, really good book.
I would say COVID accelerated what was kind of inevitable. Like we had this whole lockdown thing happen and it brought us online. So those things that were going to happen anyway have been sped up, because I think that this whole online thing, and also there's always with anything, right? There's always a positive and negative. I think the positive of us being online now is that in person is even more effectual. It's just like, whoa, like this person's coming in person to see me, and it's just a better connection, and also on top of that as well, there's a commodity, like there's an extra value on authenticity. It's like, how can you prove this is real now? Even with this AI stuff, it's freaky as hell, but it's a huge commodity now. If we can be authentic and express without, with less rigidity, I guess you could say, then we're winning. So
I wish I had Zoom shares back in what was it, 2020? So 2019. I wish I bought some Zoom shares. I'm sure they must have gone through the roof.
Zoom shares. I thought you were saying a feature on
Zoom
Zoom. You
shares.
mean, yeah,
No,
wow.
no, no, no. The shares, yeah. You
Yeah,
would have been happy owning them.
huge. Absolutely. No, they've certainly blown up, that's for sure. I wanted to
Mm.
ask, you're running 7 businesses at the moment, is that right?
Something like that. I lose count.
Something like that. So besides the Eisenhower, is that how you say it? Eisenhower?
Correct. Yep.
So besides that productivity method, the 4 quadrants, the important, urgent, not important, not urgent. What other like little things that you do? And this is a selfish question for me as well because I'm
Okay.
managing a team of 6, yeah, 6 at the moment, and for me, like it's a huge learning curve about personalities. Different people have different personalities, different management styles, and like what's relevant, what isn't. So I'd love to hear, like, just from a high level, like what other things you might do that you've learned from this 7 years or longer than that, sorry, the 7 businesses,
Mm.
and what you've learned from it. Like what's been the key?
If I give you just some bite-sized chunks, I think, well, perfectionism's gone now. And that's not to say that I encourage people to do crap work. Instead, I share the 80-20 rule. And I think that's actually it sits really well with me, which is I do earn 80% of my income from 20% of what I do. And unless you're a brain surgeon, stuff doesn't need, like, if you're going to operate on my brain, then I do want you to be a perfectionist. But, most of the stuff that we do doesn't require perfectionism. When I met my husband some God knows how many years ago, I remember him. So he met me in my heyday of practicing law.
Hmm.
Not that I don't still have heydays now, but I remember him saying something really interesting to me about not seeing life as black and white, as seeing the grey, as seeing the shades, as seeing the colours. And being trained as a lawyer, one can very quickly become, I think, uh, 2 and 2 is, we can make 2 and 2 make 4, or we can make 2 and 2 make 5. You tell us, pay us whatever you want to pay us, and we'll make the answer whatever it is that you want. But that can often, sometimes, in some instances, stifle thinking outside of the box in much more different ways than traditional ways of thinking as a lawyer. And I found that getting out of the law, even though I am still in the law, but not being full time in the law, I've learnt to look more outside of the box, and also really understand what's truly important, but just as equally what's not important. Because again,
Mm.
lawyers and other professional people, we can get strung up or so into the detail that sometimes we miss the bigger picture of things, and small things become so important, but they're really only important to us as lawyers, and it's BS to people who don't practice it. And quite often, people just want deals done, and there's a reason why lawyers are either compared to hyenas or compared to used car salesmen, neither of which are pleasant comparisons. But I'd like to think that I have stepped very far away from that mold, and therefore the legal services that I do provide are a lot better these days, not only because I'm more mature as a person and a business person and as a lawyer, but also because I really understand what's important and what's not important. And it's interesting. I can hear your dog in the background, and pre-COVID, there's no way in the world like you would have had animals in your office. Whereas I joke with clients and I say, I've got my CFO, my COO, they're right here in my office with me. That's my chief verbal officer and my chief oodle officer. And to me, that's something that's really important as well. Understanding that work, our lives are so blurred now with our private, our private and our work lives are so blurred now that having a dog in the background is something that's just not battered. You don't bat your eyelid about that. So I think that's a little bit of an extension, as well as me understanding what's important and what's not important. 10 years ago, I would have been horrified if somebody would have had their dog in their office. Now I think it's completely normal. So I've talked about the 80-20 rule. I've talked about understanding what's important and what's not important. I talked earlier on about the support systems that you have around you. And I think the other thing that I would say would be a lifelong commitment to learning. I think that's what's kept me fresh and kept me moving forward, and enabled me to keep doing different things. I would be bored to death if I was still doing the same thing now that I was doing 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And I really enjoy learning. And my dad jokes and says that I have more degrees than a thermometer. But I love to continue to learn. And I was reading a book by the author. Oh gosh, now it's just gone out of my mind. It's the guy who wrote Carrie. The guy who writes the big horror stories. It's Stephen King.
Stephen King. Yeah.
Stephen King's book on writing, and it's his writing method and what he does every day. And so he writes for a few hours every morning, and then he reads for a few hours every afternoon. And that's something that I've really tried to incorporate as well, because you can work 7 days a week if you want to. You can work 12, 13, 14, 15 hours a day if you want to. There will still be more work to be done. You'll never get your whole in tray cleared. And if you do get your whole in tray cleared, there's probably something wrong. You probably should be a little bit worried if you get your whole in tray cleared. I really try to take time out as well to decompress, to have some quiet time, some me time, some reading time, and to keep advancing my knowledge, because the last thing you want to have is a conversation, I think, with someone who's boring. And being well read, I like to think, makes you not so boring, especially if you're a lawyer. So they're the sorts of things that I try and do. I don't think you can ever have, Luke, I don't think you can ever have work-life balance. And anyone who puts those two words together, I think is a bit of a dickhead, because work and life and balance don't need to be in the same sentence. I talk more about work, life, and integration. And if you can get that integration right, so if you can work the right amount of hours that enables you to have the lifestyle that you want to have, that to me is integration. And that's not work-life balance, because it doesn't exist, but that's what makes me be able to do, if it is 7 jobs, 7 jobs. And learning, sorry, there is one last thing, learning how to say no.
Yeah.
And how to say that in a way that isn't necessarily offensive, but also doesn't have to be surrounded in excuses. It's okay to say no. And I just don't tell my husband I said that, but I can't say no. They're my little tricks. They're my hacks. Like,
what I'm hearing there a lot is strategy, and I think as any young entrepreneurs or young lawyers listening to this would know, that you can do everything, right? You can do all these different things. You can throw all these different things at the strategies, techniques, or whatever it might be. But the most important thing is that you have a strategy on what you want to do, as in exactly where you want to go, and I guess you have an overview of it, right? Because it's so easy to get caught up in the minutiae of especially running a business and various things like that. You get so caught up in the doing and the data activities and the working in the business that you forget that your choices impact the cash flow of the business, impact everything. So I'm hearing strategy, and that is the most important thing.
Yeah, there's a really interesting tool that you can buy online, Clifton Strengths 34, which costs, I think, like maybe $75 or something. And it's an online assessment. I mean, there are tons of assessments that you can do online, but Clifton Strengths 34, someone recommended it to me probably a decade or so ago, but I only started using it more recently with my coaching clients in the last 5-6 years. And it breaks down 34 strengths. And it's great to know what your top strengths are, but I probably use it more often with my clients from two different perspectives. I look at the lower level strengths, so where it is that you're not strong. It's not that you're weak, you're just not strong. A subtle difference in what that means. But whether there are areas where you want to become stronger, for want of a better description. But what I think is a little bit more of a valuable output from this assessment is whether you are predominantly a person who is strong in executing, or whether you're a person who's strong in people skills, strategy, or I'm going to have to look up the last one because it's just escaped me. Influencing, that's right. Influencing and relationship building. And often when I'm working with younger lawyers or younger professionals and they want to get to the next level of leadership, or they want to get the next promotion or whatever it is, and we do the assessment and it comes out and says that they're brilliant at the doing, but they have no people skills, they have no ability to influence, they have no strategy, and that's something when it's in front of them. The report goes for about 35 pages, I think, and it's a great report because it tells you not only where your blind spots are with your strengths, but also with your lesser strengths, what it is that you might be missing. And when somebody's missing, people building skills, influencing, strategy, and all they're doing is the doing, that to me says, dude, you're just going to stay on this mouse wheel and you're going to keep running faster and faster and faster. And that's not enough. That is not enough to get you to the next stage, because you need so much more than just being able to do. And to a certain degree, this would be a hugely a bit too big a statement to say, but our universities. I remember when I graduated, Lordy, in the early 1990s, let's just say, I came out of law school and then I had my first days in a big law firm. I knew nothing. I came home very quickly how little I knew, how completely useless I was to a client. I had honours. I thought I was really cool. I was working for a really big law firm. I knew absolutely nothing. I couldn't even do the doing back then. And it took 7-8 years, I guess, to hone the craft of the doing. But again, to go back to that comment I said earlier about the 7 years, I think once you've gone through 6, 7, 8 years of doing something, and I think there's that other saying about doing 10,000 hours of something, you become expert at it. But that's not enough. The doing is not enough. You've got to have the strategy. You've got to have the ability to influence people. And you've got to, our world consists of many, many billions of people. And so you have to have people skills. And even if you're an introvert, doesn't mean that you can't have people skills. And, extroverts don't necessarily have the best people skills. In fact, extroverts often don't know when to shut up. But there's, just so much, and age has taught me that. And I don't want that to put off any of your listeners thinking, well, I'm not as old as that bird, so I'm in a bit of strife here. It's not that at all. But I think the earlier you can learn it, the earlier you can learn that it's not all about doing. It's quite often all the other stuff. I remember interviewing a young lady whose name I cannot remember, but I remember her answer to a question that I asked her in an interview, which was, what book are you reading at the moment? And I always used to ask that question because it was never in any of the guides online as to how to answer behavioural questions, and it would always throw people. And I remember this young lady saying to me, I'm reading a book on quantitative economics or something. And I said, no, not what are you reading at university? What are you reading for pleasure at the moment? And this young girl looked at me quite quizzically and said, I'm reading a book on quantitative economics, because that's what she thought I wanted to hear. But I was leading a team of about 10, 12 lawyers, none of whom probably even had read a quantitative economics book in their life, but they were all brilliant people. And I knew that if I put somebody like that in my team, it would, as Yoda says, it would have just disturbed the balance. It wouldn't have worked. As Yoda, I like to quote Yoda. Yeah, well, it's been a few years since I've watched, I have to say. My boys are a bit old now, so I can't remember exactly what the quote is. But there's just like doing is not enough. You've got to be people. You've got to be strategy. You've also got to be human because you've got to work with other people,
Yeah, well, behind every single decision in business is a person, you know, even the IT
including
ones.
Chat GPT. Yeah, yeah, even the IT ones.
That's yeah, yeah. So like, and here's the thing, right? With Chat GPT, you're putting in inputs to write an article for people to read, but then people just get the AI to read the article to summarize it for them. So realistically, like, all this is a proxy for human connection, right? And it's like we're just simplifying it a bit. But you're right. There's like, what is it? I think there's 7.5 billion now or something people in the world.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So it's all it's human, it's social skills, it's interpersonal skills.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And there's another great book that I read recently.
How often do you read,
Goodness,
by the
it
way?
was
How many books do you go
all the
through?
time, all the
Yeah,
time. Like
yeah.
I've got bookshelves everywhere in our house. But there's a great book by Janine Garner, who's a Sydney lass who started the business Little Black Dress, and it's the 12 people you need to know, and it's her take on mentoring and
Right.
um, not necessarily just mentoring though, but probably more so networking. And there's a reason why the
Yeah.
word work is in the word networking. It is because it's work and it's hard work. And
Mm,
she talks about the 12 people you should have in your network and why you should have them. And I often do a lot of work with people on networking and how to connect with the right people, especially in the legal industry. It's a lot of it is what you know, but an awful lot of it is who you know as well, and how much you build up those relationships and what people are saying about you behind
mm.
closed doors. I often tell a story of in one of my previous jobs, I had a gentleman who effectively was my sponsor. So, we never had a conversation about that. Um, he just was somebody who would advocate for me behind closed doors. And I remember him saying to me once, "What is it that you want from your career, Claire?" This was a long time ago. And I remember
Mm.
saying to him, "Well, I want this, I want this title, I want this work, I want this pay." And I was probably a bit of a dickhead with some of the stuff I said, but he sort of smiled and went off. And then I forgot about the conversation. And then he came back, I don't know, maybe a month or two later. And he said to me something along the lines of, "Do you remember Meatloaf?" And I thought, "Oh, hello. Where's this conversation going?" And I said, "What you mean that big dude that sang that dreadful version of Bat Out of Hell or something at some football game or rugby game?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." He said, "What's your favourite song?" I said, "Oh, it was actually Paradise by the Dashboard Light." And he said, "No, no, no. What's the next one?" I said, "Oh, well, is it 2 out of 3 ain't bad?" He said, "Yeah, 2 out of 3 ain't bad." And I thought, where the hell is he going with this? And he said, "So remember that conversation we had when you told me about all the stuff that you wanted?" I said, "Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, now I know where you're going with this. Yeah, yeah." And he said, "Oh, well, had some chats with some people. And so I got you the extra work that you wanted." And I thought, "Oh, that's an interesting opening." And I said, "Oh, that's great. I've got more work coming my way. Brilliant." And he said, and I also got you the extra pay that well, actually probably got you a little bit more, but I got you the extra pay." And I thought, "Oh, okay, this has kind of gone pretty good." He said, "Yeah, that's where the 2 out of 3 ends." And I thought, "Oh shit. Well, what was it? What didn't you get?" And he said, "Well, you know how you wanted the title and then fill the title in here." And I said, "Yeah, yep." Oh. And then I figured 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So he's not got me the title. And this little smile came across his face. And he said, "Yeah, I didn't get you that title." I said, "Oh, well, thanks for getting me the extra work. But, you got me the extra pay." And he was sort of smiling. He went, "Oh, no, 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 Claire. I didn't get you that title. I got the next one up for you." And I sort of thought, shoot, did not see that coming. And that is a story that I often tell people to illustrate the importance of having someone who advocates for you behind closed doors, because that man saw in me what I didn't have back then, which was the confidence to ask for the title that I deserved. And so he went behind closed doors and advocated for me to get
Mm,
not the title I wanted, but the title that he wanted for me. And so, going back to what we were talking about earlier, so I was really good at the doing, but the influencing of people and the building of relationships wasn't as top of mind for me back then. But
mm,
he opened doors for me that were just fantastic along the way. And when I tell that story to people, you kind of see them look up and think, oh, okay, well, that's a pretty good story. And so that's the importance of, having sponsors in
Mm,
business and looking for those people who will say great stuff about you behind your back and help you to get to the next level. But it's not somebody that you just go up to one day and go, hey, how you doing? You want to be my sponsor? It's a relationship that just develops. Sorry to sound like Joey from Friends there,
yeah,
but it's
you
a
did.
relationship that develops over time. And I remember
Mm,
another gig I went for, a non-executive directorship role, and this one blew my mind. They wanted 10 referees. And I was like, where the heck am I going to get 10 referees from?
mm,
And they picked a business that I worked for. One of the businesses I worked for, I hadn't worked there for over a decade.
mm,
And I had to get a referee. And they said, we want your manager from 10 years ago. And so I rang up my manager, and I literally had not spoken to this man for over 10 years. And, he answered the phone. I said, hi, insert name here. And he was like, oh, what do you want? And I said, oh, well, look, I'm going for this gig. I need a reference. And he was like, yeah, no worries, I'll do it for you. And from what I hear, he gave me a very glowing reference, and I got the job. I got that non-executive directorship role, and I've stayed in contact with him ever since. Now and then, he'll send me a little message about what's going on. How did this board make that decision and stuff like that. So sometimes he asks me questions that he knows he shouldn't ask, and I don't answer. But the longevity of your relationships, it's really important. Not necessarily to have tens of thousands of followers on social media, or 5,000 LinkedIn connections. You need us, and to go back to Janine Garner's book, the 10 people or 12 people, it's deep relationships with a small influential group of people that you will build up over
mm,
time. And that's the thing. You got to have patience. It's a
yeah.
long game. It's not a short game. When you talk about overnight successes, there's not that many entrepreneurs who were overnight successes. They've been doing what they do for a long time.
I agree with you. And I think that the whole networking thing, to summarize it into one word, is very how people in my generation are doing it is completely, in my opinion, incorrect.
Oh
And
yeah.
why I think that.
Oh.
So I got a message yesterday, last night, I go into my LinkedIn, and open my inbox, got a message in there, and it's a person that reached out to connect to me a few days prior. And I accepted. She's like, hey, I'd love to connect. I'm like, cool, great. That's great. Awesome. Like, hey, how you doing? Like, for me, like, I try to, when I'm having connections on LinkedIn, I try to be very informal because everyone's so stifled, it feels, in a way. Like, it's like very like, hey, like, hello, robotic in a way. So I'm like, hey, awesome, connect, smiley face. What's happening? Or something like, just like random like that. Because I want to bring the humanity to it, right? And especially when someone reaches out to me like that. So like, and then 2 days later, which was I think on the last yesterday or something, I get this stock message, like
Mm.
this the stock
You
message
hate
like,
that.
oh yeah, oh yeah, it's horrible. Like stock message like paragraph. And the thing that she was proposing to me was like she was offering one of the services that I offer for my business. She's like, oh,
Yeah.
like, do you need help? I'm like, okay, so then I'm like, and I just respond, I'm like, hey, I'm just letting you know, I'm actually quite upset by this because it's really sad that you've like, and I said, and at the end, I'm like, just advice, take it or leave it. Focus on building relationships. Don't focus on yeah, like setting up an automated AI system through Galaxy, which is a automated messaging system, and
Yep.
expect to build connections. And I know
Yep.
that because I tried that. I tried that, 2 or 3 years ago, as sending messages
Yep.
out to people, like target these people. Like let's say, for example, lawyers that are 25 to 35 or 28 to 35, whatever, in the Sydney region, working at these firms or whatever it is, and you can target them directly. But people know now. People are so cluey with
Mm.
it because they get messages like that all the time. It's like, hey, da da da, are you interested in this? And not only that, but it's actually counterintuitive because you're leading with trying to get something. You always have to lead with offering something up. And something that changed my life, and this is like this conversation changed my life forever. And it was only a few months ago. I had this call with this person, and they started asking about my business. They were like just asking, like, "Oh, like what do you do?" Just asking away, asking away. I'm like, okay, she's trying to get me to do something with her. She's like, she's asking all these questions. I'm like, oh, here we go. Like she's gonna try and pitch me, da da da. And she's like, oh yeah, I've got some people I want to refer to you. I'm
Oh
like,
wow.
oh
That's
wow.
okay.
And then there's just off the cuff statement. I'm like, okay, cool. Yep. I didn't know if she was serious or not. I thought it was like a tactic still. I'm like, oh, this is some Jordan Belfort sales tactic or something like that. And I'm like, here we go. Like, so I kept listening, like some Brian Tracy, sales tactic or whatever. And then at the end, she's like, how can I serve you? The same question I asked you on the call when we
Mhm,
had the first call. She goes, how
mhm.
can I serve you? I'm like, what? I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, what can I do for you? Like, is there any way I can support or help you in your business? And I'm like, I'd love some more clients. And she's like, sure, no worries. 4 days later, she sends me an email with someone CC'd in. Hey, this is Narina, I think her name was. She works in this department in the government. Da, da, da. She would love to speak to you. And I'm like, whoa, whoa. And I'm like, so I
Hey,
called her up straight away. I'm like, how can I return the favor? Like, what? She goes, I believe in karma. I believe that everything comes full circle. And she sees it, and she's making a lot of money, like 7 figures a year. She doesn't do any marketing. It's just all referrals, all networking, and it's all from that one question, which is like,
yeah,
how can I help you? But you have to mean it when you say it. It can't be like, well, let's be sneaky about it. Like, it's just like genuinely like it's almost like a spiritual practice in a weird way. I know it sounds odd, but it's like you have to really like let go of what this person might be able to give you. It's like, how can I serve you? And people are like, whoa. And you like and you live with them, right? And it might be 6 months later, and it might be like, I need this, I need that. But you're just building relationships. And this is a part of what I do here. Like, I just want to build relationships with cool and
mm,
interesting people. And um, I think that millennials have lost that to a degree, and it's quite sad, especially with that automated message I've gotten many times now. It's been like 10, 20 of them. So yeah.
yeah, and I mean, it just dumbass stuff as well, like the font. As soon as I open that, I know it straight away. As soon as I see it, in about 2 seconds, delete.
Mm,
And if you reached out to me to connect and then you tried to sell me something, I'm just going to unconnect with you. So disconnect, sorry, not unconnect.
mm.
And oh, yeah, it's annoying. It is annoying. I mean, I don't know who's selling these programs out there, but somebody presumably is because people think it's successful, and I just think it's lazy. I'm really lazy.
Well, yeah, if anyone listening out there who wants to save time and wants to do that, I'd recommend getting someone on board, a salesperson or something, and getting them to research your target market, research the person you're reaching out to, and calibrate the message to them. Be personable, be real. Like, don't just you can get someone from overseas to do it if you really want to. Like, it's not a hard thing to do. So I think that's a huge difference it makes. Like, I want to aim towards these people here, like learn about these people and come back to me with a brief, and I'll tell you whether or not you should do it. Like, it's a bit of extra time. Even beyond that, like, just forget about that and just write the message yourself. Like, that's just how the world works. People, I read something recently as well. It's like people, they're not just paying for services of people. They're paying for attention and connection, right? I don't mean like they're lonely and they want connection, but they're paying for direct support. And if you want to then try and get a new connection by not having any connection, you're doing the exact opposite of what it takes to be there for someone. And that's what business is,
Yeah,
right? So to a degree.
yeah, yeah. When I speak to potential clients for coaching, one of the things I actually put in my email that I came back to them was, "You didn't come to me because you wanted to be coached by Claire Bibby. That's not your goal, and I know that. You've come to me because you've got an outcome that you want to reach, and I've got the tools to potentially help you get there." And people respond well to that.
Mm.
Well, I found they do. Anyway, it's that little bit more of a personal approach. That's why, if I go back to what I used to do when I was in private practice as a lawyer, and I just think, God, how did I like God? Oh God, I would never want to do that again. I would never want to work in that environment again. But for some people, I think there's also, to go back to that saying from Richard Branson about having 7 different sources of income. I remember when I was first starting out, the thought of being a consultant or a contractor freaked me out because I thought, my God, you don't know where your next source of income is coming from. But when you work for an organization, you only have one source of income, and you just need one person in that organization to decide, yeah, you're not right for us anymore. And they can take away your entire source of income, your entire career in one fold, just in one swoop. So if
Yeah.
anybody is thinking, do I want to go out and try something and do it on my own? I always say, absolutely. Let's just go for it. Like, the worst thing in life, I think I mentioned this to you earlier, is having regret. And just go and have a shot. What's the worst thing that could happen? Because that's not going to happen anyway.
It's a school of teaching you, I mean, your flaws and your strengths. Like, you're going to naturally have to step up, especially in business. Like, it is one of the most toughest things to do. I mean, obviously not everything is tough, but I'm saying generally speaking, because again, like I said before, like when things aren't working, you're at the cause of that. It's like, well, no sales are coming in. It's like, well, then you haven't prioritized sales. Or like, my someone left the job. It's like, well, why they leave the job for? So you have to almost have this question everything, kind of mindset. It's like, why did this happen? Or why did this happen? Was the hiring process? Did I do this in the hiring process? Did I hire the wrong person? Or was it the exit process? Was it someone saying something about this or that? And it's like this whole operation, right? That's why I find it so fascinating that you're doing, 7 of these, because I think once you have the mechanics of one, it kind of translates to another one, especially when they're kind of similar businesses. But still, like, it's an operational, how would you say? It can be an operational nightmare if you don't get it right.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you there. I think we talked about this earlier. I'm pretty strict with my diary. I don't give commitments to people that I know I can't make. And if I say I'll be on a call at 3:30, I'll be on a call at 3:30. I won't join at 3:40 and give you some poxy excuse as to why I was late. If I'm late for something, there's got to be a really good reason. My husband says being on time is late, and he's drilled that into myself and the kids. So, when we have our 6 o'clock roast every fourth Sunday, the boys are all here about 1:45, 5:50. No one arrives at 6 o'clock. We don't start eating at 6 o'clock. That sounds like Nana and Grandad eating time, but that's what has been drilled into us. And that's just respect for other people's time. I got a great WhatsApp message the other day from one of the chairs of one of the boards that this one I volunteer for, and the chair was overseas and got the time zone wrong. And her WhatsApp message to everybody was so apologetic, and she basically called herself out for stuffing up the time zone. And she said something that I'd never read before in a message, and it was, I respect all of your time so much, and I'm so deeply regretful that I wasted your time. And I just thought, oh shit, that's a good way to say that. Like, it was a really genuine, heartfelt, I stuffed up and I'm sorry. And how can you be annoyed at somebody who just mucked up a time zone but really apologized for it in a heartfelt way? That human to human connection. And I can tell you there won't be one person, I don't think anyway, who would have been on that call who would be annoyed at her because she was just really, I'm so sorry, like, I stuffed up. And I like that about people. None of us are perfect. And that's another learning, I think, that when you stuff something up, although, this wasn't a stuff up, but when you stuff something up, is to confess early, and apologize early, because it is not good to either try and hide something or hope that you can avoid it and put the paper bag over your head and no one will notice that you've really mucked something up, because that is just a recipe for things getting worse.
Everyone notices.
The avoidance. Yeah, like, it's just really, I remember being in a negotiation once. Again, this was in my younger years, and I didn't act appropriately. And when I left the meeting, I said to a colleague, I didn't do anything nasty, just I did speak out of turn to somebody. And when I left the meeting, I said to a trusted colleague of mine, how was that? And she was like, Claire, you should not have spoken to that person like that. And so I took the time to ring. There was like 15 people in the room. I rang every one of those 15 people individually and apologized. And one of them was a really senior lawyer. And he said to me, that took guts. That must have taken guts for you to ring up and apologize to me, because you didn't say it to me. And I said, well, yeah, and I did it straight after the meeting, and I regretted it immediately. It was the heat of the moment. I was really annoyed at this person, but I let my self-sabotaging behavior take over. The left side of my brain took over, and I just went, wah, and said what I was thinking, didn't have the filter on. And so I apologized. And I tell that story to people because I'm proud of the fact that I rang every one of those 15 people individually. The one person in particular I rang immediately, and then I rang the other 15 people afterwards. And one of them turned out to be a colleague who I've been in touch with since then. So that was like 10, 15 years ago. I had this matter. And we just instantly built a relationship from that, I think, because of the fact that I knew that I'd stuffed up and I fessed up about it quickly. And this was a really quiet, gentle lawyer. Not many of those around. But he and I have stayed in contact for a long time since then, I think, because, again, we were talking about the humanity of the circumstance. He saw how regretful I was for my behaviour. So that's another thing as well, I think, that's important. When you stuff up, go on record quickly and genuinely.
Yep, and you can't be perfect, right? And it's like when I make mistakes with my clients, the first thing that I say, if things are late or going to be late, I say, I'm sorry for this being late. Even if it's an hour late, I'm so sorry this is late. This is really important to me. This is what happened, X, Y, Z happened, but this is really important to me. I'm doing my best to get it to you as soon as possible. Like, just really make it clear, like, this is really important to me. I take this seriously. Because again, like you said, you can't just put a paper bag over your head and be like, oh, like, nothing happened here. Like, oh, I got it to you. Here it is. And it's so tempting to do that because it's much easier. But people like understand. People know that mistakes happen. I think it's only the pressure we put on ourselves. And it's like, well, I made a mistake. Yes, look at this, another mistake. How can I not make the mistake in future? Am I doing things I don't want to be doing? Should I be outsourcing this or doing something different? Why am I late on this? Is it because I don't want to do it? There's many things to it, but also being super clear on that mistake as well. So I hear that.
It takes a long time to build a relationship, but you can kill the trust in instant. And once that's gone, once the trust is gone, just forget it.
Absolutely. So when it comes to business, and this is the last question, I guess. What is the biggest mistake, or for lawyers and just for general business owners? You can give both if you like. What is the biggest mistake you see people making?
God, that's a bit of a big question. What's the biggest mistake I see people making? So I wouldn't say it's the biggest, one of the biggest mistakes I see, and this is probably with mid-career lawyers. I'll go with that because I was one once.
Sure.
And that's the sunk cost fallacy, that I have spent 5 years at university studying. I've spent 6 years working in this law firm. That's 11 years of my life. I identify as, insert title here, lawyer, accountant, banker, whatever it is. So I can't swap careers. And I just think that's complete bollocks. I've swapped careers. Whilst I've still remained relatively consistent in that there's been a legal influence in it, I have done it at least twice. Once was about, would be about 7 or 8 years into my career. And then the other time was about 15 years after that. You can always, this is going to sound awful, you can always teach a new dog. You can always teach an old dog new tricks. And so if you're not happy, if you're not doing what floats your boat, if you're not doing what's aligned with your values, if you're not happy, stop doing what doesn't make you happy and pivot. So again, if you're creating a product that is not selling, stop and pivot, do something else. It's madness to keep doing the same thing over and over again just because you've put so much resource into it. You have to know when to stop and walk away. And it's the same with relationships. What's that saying about people come for a season or a lifetime? I know I've missed something out there. There's another. There's three.
I know what you're saying there.
But like know when to walk away. That is for a lot of lawyers in particular. They are so wrapped up in the fact that I have to be a lawyer. I cannot not be a lawyer. And I think that's just such BS. You can, there are most politicians are lawyers. That's not necessarily a good comparison to make. But, there's a lot of journalists. There's a lot of people who write. There's a lot of business people. There's a lot of entrepreneurs. There's a lot of people who don't tell you that they're lawyers, but that training that we get, that disciplined way to think, to reason, to argue.
Critical thinking.
Oh, it's brilliant. Well, it's all left brain again behavior, which is fantastic to a certain degree. But you don't just want to stay in that. And that's one of the limiting things of what we are trained as lawyers, very logical ways to think when you need to get outside of that
Mm,
box. So once you're becoming stale at something, or once you're not enjoying something, or once it's not making any money for you, if money is the goal that you're after, or if it's not bringing you happiness, hang up your shingle and move on to the next thing, because life is too short to have regrets that you wanted to be a ballroom dancer and all you did was become an accountant for 15 years, because there's only so many, you know, money doesn't buy you happiness. It certainly pays a lot of bills, don't get me wrong. But if you're not happy, don't go by, this is my title, this is my ego, this is the sunken cost. I've put too much time and energy. My parents will be upset. My sibling will be upset, because I think it's one of the lessons in Dr. Zeus, which is you have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself any direction you choose. And
hmm
I love that. I just
That's
go
awesome.
and do something else. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Dr. Zeus says a lot of awesome stuff. You can learn a lot from Dr. Zeus. So
Mm.
that's another thing.
I'm impressed that you remember that. That's great.
Oh, actually, I had it up so there. You might not have noticed. My eyes kept going up,
I
looking
was
at it.
going to
So,
say,
I got the 5 lessons in Dr. Zeus just up here. So
that's
the other
great.
one I love is be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. That's a pretty cool one as
Wow.
well. I like that. Yeah,
That's
gotta love
great.
Dr. Zeus.
That's awesome.
Hope that answered your question.
It does. And I think just one thing that I want to add to that when it comes to specifics like products or services in the sunk cost fallacy thing, you need to understand the measurements for that as well. Like, what does that actually look like? Because not just a feeling, it's not like, well, this is not working. It's like, what do you mean it's not working? What's not working? Is it like, what's the churn rate and all these things? So I think that's an important point as well. Not just, if it doesn't feel right, just don't do it. Maybe relationships, of course, that's a different story. You can't, we probably can measure relationships, but you don't want to. It's a bit weird. Um, but I mean, you can to a degree. I'm talking about interrelationships, that is. But yeah, so sunk cost fallacy, it needs to have a level of measurement to it. So I think that's an important part that I'd just like to add on top of that as well.
Yeah, well, one of the exercises I do with there's only one exercise I do with every single coaching client, and that's a values exercise. And people say that it's only like 4 or 5 pages long, 10 questions or something, but it takes people 2, 3, 4 hours to do, because it asks really pointed, deep questions that make them think. And if they
Is
don't
it
do
Dear
that,
Martini?
they don't do the no, it's mine.
Oh, right. Awesome.
But if they
Right.
don't do the exercises, if they don't ask the questions, I'll know that they've cheated. But I always ask people to work out what their values are and then make their decisions going forward based on their values. And if you do that, you're not guaranteed of success, but you've certainly got a much better chance of being happy
hmm
and content if you live life and practice your craft according to the values and what makes you tick.
You're stacking the odds in your favor.
Absolutely. And just on that, my earphones went flat. So that is the world telling us that our time in the house is up, I reckon.
I agree. So is there any places that you want to direct people where they can visit you, or I imagine your website?
Yeah, love them to have a look at my website, Claire Bibby, CLAIREBIBBY.com. You can book a complimentary 30-minute, no obligation, free chat with me, which would be absolutely delightful. Just don't try and get a call on a Friday, because I ain't going to talk to you on a Friday.
It'd be bombastic.
Legal. Yeah, that's very good. Legal services, coaching services, non-executive directorship. Or if you just want to chat to a bird that's been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, you're very welcome to give us a buzz. Thanks for your
Love it.
time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you. See you later.